Your quarterback is injured, your tight end is probably terrible, and your league probably forces you to play defenses every single week. But don't worry, I got you covered. I'm going to give you my top 3 streamers at each of those positions heading into week 4 that you can go out and get possibly off the waiver wire if you need to. And don't forget, while you're going to look for these players and setting your fantasy football lineups, there is still time to get your week 4 pick'ems in on Underdog Fantasy. And if you're new to Underdog Fantasy, they're going to give you this Lamar Jackson special free pick. He just needs to go over half a yard on Sunday Night Football. He does that, you win right off the bat there. And don't also forget, if you're joining Underdog for the first time, make sure you join using promo code ENDGAME, because that's going to get you not only this Lamar Jackson free pick, but up to $1,000 in bonus cash that you can use right away to put on any picks you want. Now let's start. For those of you that need quarterback this week, my number 1 streaming option without a doubt is going to be Caleb Williams this week. Now, he was dropped a lot after week 2, and then after his big week 3 performance, he's been re-added, but he's still out there in about a third of fantasy leagues. So maybe he's out there in your league, or maybe you already added him. If so, I think he's worth streaming this week. We finally saw a game that made us think, hey, this is why this guy was the number 1 pick. 363 yards, 2 touchdowns. Yes, still did throw 2 interceptions, but you know what? If we're going to get this kind of yardage and these kind of touchdowns, we can look past the interceptions here. It's not a big deal. And you got to love the matchup this week going against the Los Angeles Rams, giving up the 2nd most points to QBs in fantasy this year. Also allowing an absurd 9.81 yards per attempt to passers, by far the highest in the league, and they've allowed 7 touchdowns and have only intercepted quarterbacks 1 time all season long. So maybe this is the week Caleb Williams throws for big yards, big touchdowns, and doesn't turn the ball over. I think if you're looking for a streaming quarterback and he's still out there, or maybe you still have him on your bench, or maybe you picked him up after week 3, he's got to be your number 1 choice. And I think your number 2 choice has to be Andy Dalton, still only rostered in about 12% of fantasy leagues. He was a guy recommended last week as a streaming option, and he certainly came through for us. Over 300 yards, 3 touchdowns, and no interceptions. Now, he does get a slightly more difficult matchup this week. He's at home against the Cincinnati Bengals, but look, we just saw what Jaden Daniels did to this Bengals defense. By no means should this matchup scare you away from playing Andy Dalton. And yeah, there is some bit of a revenge game here, right? Remember, he started his career in Cincinnati, had many good years for Cincinnati. Maybe. I don't think Andy Dalton cares about that at this point in his career. This guy's 36 years old. He's not playing for his NFL future. He's not playing to try to show NFL teams he can be their starting quarterback. He's just playing football. He's just out there slinging it. Not a care in the world. We saw that last week. We're probably going to see it again this week. So no reason to be scared off of Andy Dalton this week. If you picked him up to stream him last week, or maybe you were too scared and he was like, nah, I don't want to, go ahead, roll him out there again in week 4. Nothing to fear here. Maybe he won't be as good as he was last week, but he should still be plenty good. And then another QB I recommended last week who was good and still out there in about 50% of leagues right now is Sam Darnold. Now, I will say the reason I have him at number 3 is because this isn't a great spot for Sam Darnold. Going on the road into Green Bay against this secondary in this Green Bay, environment there. But still, he's been so good in fantasy this year. Believe it or not, Sam Darnold is the QB4 in fantasy leagues right now. He's got Kevin O'Connell, who absolutely looks like a QB whisperer at this point. Like, give this guy any decent quarterback and he'll make him good. Justin Jefferson is healthy. It sounds like Jordan Addison is coming back. He's got weapons. He's in this great system. Sure, there's always a chance here. He's number 3 because the risk is higher here. Because, again, it's on the road in Green Bay. Not necessarily a smash spot here. But, look, if Caleb Williams is gone, if Andy Dalton is gone, I think Sam Darnold is your next best bet. He's been playing so well this year. He's in this Vikings offense. At a minimum, he can probably give you 200-plus yards and a couple touchdowns. So he won't kill you. Maybe he doesn't have the upside of the first 2 guys, but he probably won't kill you this week either. On to tight end, and look, if you think it's rough for your tight end, don't worry. It's rough for everybody's tight end right now, but this has actually been one of the best years to stream tight ends because you don't need huge production off the waiver wire to match your opponent's tight end most weeks. So let's talk about 3 tight ends that are still out there in a lot of leagues that you can stream, and I'm going to start with Zach Ertz. Still only 24% rostered in fantasy leagues, and I get why he's only 24% rostered. It's not like Zach Ertz is having huge games or anything, but 8 fantasy points 2 weeks ago, 10 fantasy points last week. But look, that's a top 10 tight end every week this year. Like, you get 8 to 10 fantasy points from your tight end, that's more than good enough. He's had 4 or more targets in every game, 3 or more catches in every game. No, he doesn't have the biggest ceiling here, but I mean, which tight end has a big ceiling at this point? If I can get a tight end that I know is going to just give me 8 to 10 fantasy points, what's wrong with that? And I've been talking about it. This Commanders offense, every single week, we've seen improvement. We've seen them opening up the playbook, trusting Jaden Daniels more. We saw that on Monday Night Football. Why wouldn't it continue this week? I mean, really, it's Terry McLaurin, it's Zach Ertz, maybe a little bit of Luke McCaffrey, and that's really it. So, I mean, Zach Ertz should have a very, very high floor for you at tight end. If you just want a guy who can get you solid amount of points and won't kill you, and will probably match your opponent's tight end that they drafted in the earlier rounds, Zach Ertz is your guy. Now, if you do want to chase a little bit more upside, you can chase Tyler Conklin, 26% rostered, coming off that big game in week 3 where he had 5 catches for 93 yards. Again, though, I'm going to caution you here. Remember, we did this last week with Hunter Henry and Mike Gesicki. They were coming off big week 2s. Everybody went out and streamed them, and they completely disappointed us. It's not like anything changed for Tyler Conklin here. He didn't suddenly run more routes. He wasn't suddenly on the field more. This is a guy who's run, 90+% of the routes all season, been out there almost every snap. It just happened in week 3. The targets went his way. But there is a chance they go his way again this week, not just because he had a big game last week, but because they're playing the Denver Broncos. Denver Broncos bottom 10 against tight ends this year because their outside corners, especially Pat Surtain, are so good against wide receivers that quarterbacks just take those easy over-the-middle throws to the tight end. So while there is certainly a chance Tyler Conklin pulls a Hunter Henry or a Mike Gesicki and completely busts this week in week 4, there's also a chance we see a game similar to last week where Garrett Wilson's being mostly locked down, maybe Allen Lazard's being locked down, and Aaron Rodgers just has to take passes to the tight end to Tyler Conklin. So again, they're definitely riskier than Zach Ertz here, more of a boom bust kind of, I guess, upside tight end. But if Ertz is already rostered and you're looking for more of that upside play at tight end, I think Conklin is the guy to look for. Now, if you're willing to take on some more risk at tight end and looking for more upside, I think Colby Parkinson is your play this week. Still only 24% rostered, and look, he didn't come through last week with Puka and Kupp out, but we did see an actual change in his role. The week before, he did a lot of blocking, but last week he had the highest route percentage of any tight end and was 7th highest in target share among all tight ends. And now you look, you say, well, it's the Bears. They're such a good defense. And yes, no doubt about it. They are such a good defense. But similar to the Broncos, they have very strong corners. They're very strong against wide receivers. But because of that, they have given up the 27th most points to tight ends this year because, again, quarterbacks just take what this defense gives them. And a lot of times that's just the tight end over the middle for those safe throws. This could absolutely benefit Colby Parkinson this week. And again, we're not going to see Cooper Kupp. We're not going to see Puka Nacua. Demarcus Robinson didn't step up. I mean, I guess Tutu Atwell did a little bit. Jordan Whittington didn't step up. I mean, they're going to need to throw the ball to other players. Maybe it's Colby Parkinson this week. If he gets that kind of target share against this defense, he could certainly have a nice game. He's always got touchdown upside. Sure, he's risky, but if you're looking for that upside in the tight end slot, he can do it for you. Now let's move on to defense. Let me first say, these are not my 3 favorite defenses this week. These are the defenses that are about 50% or less rostered that I think are your best bets if you're looking to stream defense. So let's start with the Houston Texans taking on the Jacksonville Jaguars. Only 49% rostered right now, but I think Houston might legit be a top 5 defense this week. It's crazy that we're at the point where it's like, we need to stream against Trevor Lawrence, but we need to stream against Trevor Lawrence. So far in the season, Trevor Lawrence only has 2 passing touchdowns versus 1 interception, and he's been sacked 11 times in 3 games. And when you look at this Texans defense, they rank 6th in pressure rate, and they have the 3rd most interceptions. They have 3 interceptions through the first 3 games. This could be a game where they're getting a ton of pressure on Trevor Lawrence, forcing him into obvious passing situations. They're at home. They're coming off a tough loss. I think they're going to blow this Jaguars team out, similar to what we saw on Monday night. And the Jags are going to be in those obvious passing situations. That means the Texans can pin their ears back, come after Trevor Lawrence, force turnovers, and get sacks. I think the Texans are a great defense this week, and they're still out there in over half of leagues. My number 2 streaming defense is going to be the Titans against the Miami Dolphins, out there in over 80% of fantasy leagues. Now, I will say I think they're a little bit more of a floor than a ceiling play here, because this isn't a defense that's going to generate a ton of sacks, get a ton of turnovers. But the matchup is so good. They're going against Miami that's either going to be rolling out Skylar Thompson, who was sacked 7 times last week. That's ridiculous. Or Snoop Huntley, and that doesn't scare me at all. You look at Snoop Huntley in his 20 career games, he has 8 touchdowns versus 7 interceptions, and he's been sacked 29 times, and that was while playing behind that Baltimore Ravens offensive line. Now he's got to play behind this Dolphins offensive line that hasn't looked great this year, and the Dolphins only have an implied team total of 19 points in this game. So sure, the Titans, they may not win you your week as a defensive streamer, but they're probably not going to lose you your week either. If you're just looking for a defense that you know will be safe and get you points, it's the Titans. Now, if you want to look for a little more upside and take on a little bit more risk, let's look on the other side of that game. The Miami Dolphins still only about 50% rostered across fantasy leagues, even though they've got the best matchup this week against the Tennessee Titans, who have just been like a fantasy gold for streaming defenses. I talked about Trevor Lawrence as a guy to stream against. What about Will Levis? Only 3 passing touchdowns versus 5 interceptions, and he's been sacked 15 times in 3 games. That's 5 sacks per game. Oh, and not to mention, he's added 3 fumbles in there for good measure, because why not? Look, the thing with Will Levis when you're streaming against him is always the same thing. There's a chance Will Levis goes out there against this Miami defense, which, let's be real, they're not great. They're not putting a lot of pressure. The secondary is banged up and not very good. They're not a great defense, but look, Will Levis can either go out there and light this team up and put up a big game, and you're like, oh, why did I do this? Or Will Levis can throw a pick 6, take 3 or 4 sacks, turn the ball over a few times, and you're loving life with this defense. So if you're willing to risk it and you're just looking for that pure upside play at defense, maybe you're, projected to lose by a wide margin and you need to try to hit a home run, I think the Dolphins are the stream you need to look at this week. Still widely out there, and they have maybe the most upside of any defense this week as far as streaming defenses go. All right, if you're streaming, those are your best bets. But look, we got everything else you need this week too. We got who to start, who to sit, who could boom. Maybe you still need to grab players on the waiver wire. Maybe you're trying to get ahead of the waiver wire and beat the breakout. Everything you need, you can find it right here in this week's playlist.